The night over central Ukraine was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Along the banks of the Dnipro River, the massive hydroelectric dam stood like a sleeping giant, its turbines humming softly beneath layers of concrete and steel. Inside the control tower of the Dnipro Hydroelectric station, the operators were running through routine diagnostics. The glowing screens showed smooth energy output lines, stable voltages, and balanced water flow. Everything appeared normal, until the first alert flashed red. Unidentified aerial objects. Southwest approach, a technician muttered, his voice cracking slightly. The senior engineer leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. Seconds later, a second alarm joined the first, followed by another. The system began screaming with layered sirens, each one signaling an incoming threat. Outside, the night sky came alive. Far above the calm river, the distant streaks of light appeared, missiles cutting through the darkness like fiery comets. Anti-air defense systems near Zaporizhia roared to life, launching interceptors that split the air with thunder. The ground trembled with every explosion in the distance, each flash reflected in the rippling waters of the Dnipro. Shut down turbines 3 and 4. Isolate the main bus lines, the chief operator shouted into his headset. His commands fought against the roar of chaos as the room shook violently. A massive explosion lit up the western horizon. The power monitors flickered, showing voltage drops and line losses spreading through the system. A missile struck the transformer yard. A wall of fire erupted, consuming metal towers and cables in an instant. Shockwaves shattered windows, throwing glass across the control room. Alarms blared continuously, a deafening chorus of warning, tones that mixed with the distant cries of workers running for cover. The operators tried desperately to save what they could. Screens blinked off one by one as backup systems failed. The hydro turbines began to whine, first softly, then louder, until the sound became a mechanical scream. The Dnipro, once steady and proud, seemed to cry out beneath the assault. Within minutes, the dam's lights went out, plunging the entire complex into darkness. Only the glow of burning transformers lit the scene. Above the smoke and chaos, the river kept flowing, dark, heavy and silent, carrying with it the echo of a nation's energy heartbeat, faltering into the night. In Kyiv's National Energy Control Center, the night had started quietly. Rows of engineers and analysts monitored the country's vast electrical grid, their screens filled with lines, numbers, and pulsing lights that represented the lifeblood of Ukraine's energy network. Coffee cups stood half-finished beside keyboards, and soft radio chatter filled the air. But then, just after midnight, the main status board flickered, a brief pulse, a blink, and one of the engineers frowned. "Sector Delta reporting instability. Voltage fluctuations from the Dnipro Cascade," she said. At first, her colleagues assumed it was just a sensor fault. But moments later, a chain of red warnings spread across the screen like drops of blood in water. "Dnipro process offline," read the first line. Then came the next. "Kremenchuk station unresponsive." Another followed. "Kyiv hydro output failing." Within minutes, panic overtook the control center. Maps that once glowed green began to dim, section by section, as regions dropped from the grid. Entire power corridors vanished, replaced by black voids. The hum of servers mixed with the rising murmur of disbelief. Phones began to ring all at once, local authorities, military command, hospitals, all demanding answers. "Switch to backup routing through Kharkiv line," shouted the shift director. But when the engineers tried, the system refused to respond. The overload had already reached critical. Massive power surges traveled through the high-voltage network, shorting out substations hundreds of kilometers away. Somewhere in the east, a transformer exploded, causing a chain reaction that rippled through the grid like lightning. Then came the worst moment. The big screen in the center of the room went completely dark. The operators were left staring at their reflections in the black glass. The only light came from emergency lamps that bathed the room in red. Silence filled the space for a few seconds, the silence of disbelief. Across the country, cities fell one after another into darkness. Kyiv's skyline disappeared, leaving only the occasional flicker of headlights or distant fires. In hospitals, doctors shouted for flashlights as machines died mid-operation. Elevators froze between floors. Families huddled by windows, listening to the faraway thunder of explosions. In that single hour, the heart of Ukraine's power network, decades of infrastructure, were collapsed like a dying constellation. And in the control room, someone whispered the truth no one wanted to hear. It's gone. The grid is gone. The Dnipro River glowed red under the burning sky. Smoke curled above the water like dark serpents, twisting toward the stars that now hid behind a veil of ash. The echoes of explosions had faded, replaced by the dull hiss of burning oil and the distant crackle of collapsing steel. The once proud hydroelectric complex was now an inferno, a monstrous silhouette against the horizon. From the nearby village of Enerhodar, residents watched in stunned silence. Some stood on rooftops, others peered from shattered windows, their faces lit by the orange reflection of flames dancing on the river's surface. The air was thick with heat and the metallic scent of destruction. "The river is on fire," someone whispered. Though it wasn't, it was the oil and debris spreading across its surface, blazing like a cursed mirror. Rescue crews began to move toward the site. Fire trucks, military jeeps, and ambulances crept through ruined roads, their sirens drowned by the roaring blaze. Men in soot-covered uniforms carried hoses and medical kits, shouting to each other through masks. "There are survivors near the turbine hall," one voice called out. They ran through smoke so dense it seemed alive, choking their lungs and blinding their eyes. Every few minutes, another explosion tore through the night as overheated transformers burst apart, sending sparks into the black sky. By the riverside, an old man stood motionless, clutching a lantern. "The Dnipro used to sing," he murmured, staring at the boiling water. "Now it cries." Around him, dead fish floated to the surface, their silver scales catching the firelight before drifting away. The current carried charred fragments of metal, insulation, and broken glass downstream, silent witnesses to what had been lost. Inside what remained of the control building, two engineers searched the wreckage for data drives, coughing and stumbling over debris. "We need the logs," one said, voice hoarse. "They'll tell us what happened." But even as they tried to save evidence, the structure groaned above them. Concrete cracked. A steel beam collapsed nearby with a deafening clang. By dawn, the fire had devoured everything it could. What remained was ruin, a silent graveyard of twisted steel, smoldering transformers and blackened turbines. The mighty Dnipro, once the artery of Ukraine's power and pride, now flowed heavy and dark, carrying with it the echoes of that terrible night. A night when light surrendered to silence. When the first light of dawn touched the banks of the Dnipro, it revealed a landscape scarred beyond recognition. The smoke had thinned, drifting low over the river like mourning veils. The once majestic hydroelectric complex stood in ruins, blackened concrete, twisted steel beams, and pools of stagnant water reflecting the pale morning sky. The turbines that had once roared with life were silent now, their giant blades frozen mid-motion, covered in soot and ash. Teams of engineers and rescue workers moved through the wreckage carefully, their boots crunching over shattered glass and burned cables. The air was still warm from the fires, and every breath carried the taste of metal and smoke. "Watch your step," one rescuer warned as they entered what had once been the main control room. The floor was a mosaic of debris, charred documents, melted screens and fragments of shattered instruments. A Ukrainian flag, blackened at the edges, still hung stubbornly from the wall. At the river's edge, a group of engineers stood in silence, watching the slow current carry away the remnants of the night. A piece of insulation here, a fragment of wiring there. One of them, a young woman with ash streaked across her face, knelt and touched the water. "It's warm," she whispered. "Still bleeding heat from the turbines." And an older technician beside her shook his head, his eyes tired but defiant. "We'll rebuild," he said softly. "They can destroy machines, not our hands." Across Ukraine, millions remained without power. Cities had fallen quiet. No hum of electricity, no streetlights, no neon signs. People gathered around stoves, candles, and old radios powered by batteries. Despite exhaustion and fear, there was resilience in their faces. Families shared blankets and stories. Neighbors offered food. Children wrote messages of hope on paper scraps, taping them to windows like talismans against despair. By noon, the engineers had begun sketching recovery plans on soot-covered notebooks. They spoke of bypassing damaged lines, rerouting power from smaller plants, and bringing back light one city at a time. The destruction was immense, but so was their determination. As the sun climbed higher, its rays pierced the smoke and shimmered on the surface of the Dnipro. The river, dark and scarred, flowed on, slower, quieter, yet unbroken. It carried the story of that night into the distance, a story not of defeat, but of endurance.